whereas the objective part is what we know best. And actually, most of science is still about objectivity. But we have learned since the last century that there are certainly subjective side of science that we cannot ignore. And what's more, from quantum mechanics, relativity, and so on, we learn that the observer has to be a part of the observed. I think that is a very important message. And then we see that we listening that, but there is this problem in science that we need universal recognition. So if the subjective side of one person is not quite the same as another one, then there would be problems, certainly in interpretation of the observations. So the question, I think every good lecture should leave someone with questions in mind. So the question in mind, maybe Arthur can then come in and explain to me, is there such a thing as kind of general subjectivity? Subjectivity that everyone can say, this is the same, this is the subjective side that I also think is true, and the other people can also think that it's true. Can we all agree on the subjective side? I think that is the main message I want to give, because I only have 3 minutes, right? The second message that I would like to leave you with is, of course, I grew up in the Buddhist tradition, and I learned a lot about the Buddhism, and especially relation of Buddhism to science, and people like Prof. Kunapon, or we'd like to call him Jakun Prayut, who taught us about science and religion, science and Buddhism, and I just help you in the Life of Mind Institute. Thank you very much.
Professor Zajonc, would you like to respond right now, or listen? I think it's better to respond.
Let me say just a couple of words. First of all, thank you for your clarity in terms of the summary of some of the take-home points. I think that's very helpful. Question of universality. That the science of, say, physics is the paradigmatic science, where it doesn't matter what country you live in, it doesn't matter what language you speak, the laws of physics are the laws of physics. Now, every particular expression of those laws, of course, is individuated. So a particular set of boundary conditions, a particular set of circumstances will then lead to a certain specific experience or set of predictions. So on one hand, at a very general, abstract level, there's a universality, but the actual expression of that universal principle is quite particular. So then one would ask, is there a way in which one can work in the subjective sense towards that same kind of goal? Is there a way, for example, in which human nature, experienced subjectively as individuals, might point us to something which is universal within all of us, and that it will show up in its own individual way in my life and your life, but that nonetheless there is a core reality to what it means to be human. Now, as you may know, the Dalai Lama has recently written a book called Beyond Religion. And in some ways he's, I think, asking that same question. Is there a way in which the subjective dimension, that is to say the humanness, the human qualities that we have, transcend any particular spiritual or religious tradition, and that the human being is innately compassionate, innately generous? Can we experience that in ourselves as human beings, that quality? And from a scientific standpoint, can we even make studies of infant and early childhood development and see evidence of that innate lineage? Is there a pedagogy and curriculum that supports the innate capacities for kindness, generosity, and compassion? Is there good scientific evidence that these are innate? Is there scientific way of working that allows us to discover the best pedagogical and curricular innovations that are age appropriate. And I'm hopeful that the early evidence that it is part of our own inner human nature, this can be supported. Maybe just one last comment, which is a bit more pragmatic, so to speak. How would you do a subjective inner science, which led to the kind of insight and universals that you're talking about? And one example is a working group of two neuroscientists, myself, one of America's leading contemplative teachers. Desire. It's the human experience of desire and its effects on consciousness. And the very first exercise we did, we've done now several of these different types of exercises, was to still the mind, come into a deep state of meditation. And then each of us identified the desire which for us is the most disturbing. And then we placed that into the still form of our consciousness and watched its working. Where did we feel it in the body? What did it do to our perceptions? How did we try to get rid of it? Was there any lingering after effect? Was there a way to transform the desire itself to something good? Did we find a way to not just repress it, but maybe make use of it? It was a fascinating study. And in many cases, we had very, very similar responses. It was a kind of phenomenology of consciousness with careful observation, free of, you might say, expectations by and large, and simply trying to map the disturbance in consciousness which a particularly challenging desire gives. I think I'll leave it at that. Maybe that's the beginning of a science which could lead to universals.
My second question about the wisdom.
He's speaking in English, and anybody who have difficulties following my English could use the help of the translator. I have some points that I would like to share with Arthur. I'm a philosopher. So I teach philosophy here at this university, and my interests include ethics of science and technology, as you can see in the program. I'm the director of the Center for Ethics of Science and Technology here at Jula. So I work not only with humanists and philosophers, I work also with scientists and people who deal with technologies. Most of the time, those are medical people, people in the Faculty of Medicine. I work with them on issues on research on human subjects, for example. And I'm also interested in science and technology policy, social aspects of science and technology. On the other side, I'm also a strong Buddhist in a way, practicing Buddhist. I'm vice president of the Thousand Stars Foundation. The foundation was set up by my wife, who used to teach here at Jula, but now she resigned in order to work full-time. We try to promote mutual understanding between the Thai and Tibetan traditions of Buddhism. And we regularly invite monks from the Tibetan area in China and in Nepal and India, Tibetan monks to come to Thailand and give lectures and to share thoughts. That is the case. There should be more channels, more avenues where people from the humanities and scientists could get along with one another and doing the same projects together. So I'm completely in agreement with you on this point. My comment is is that it's more on the way the humanities are being set up and are being taught. I think not only at this university, but I think it's a general trend, including also in the West, where the attitude of humanists, philosophers, literary scholars, and so on, they tend to look at science and technology from they have a kind of love and hate attitude towards science and technology. On the one hand, they tend to they recognize the power of science and technology. So the way people in the humanities are being taught, and I like that you mentioned teaching and curriculum, because this is all my business here. For example, at this Faculty of Arts, students have to take only one or at most 2 courses.
And so forth, and then there's the world of ethics. How do we conduct our lives? And that there are really 2 communities. One community is the science community, and the other the community of religious and spiritual practitioners who design the ethics of the matter. Karl Barth in Europe, at the time of the Second World War, created what he called neo-orthodoxy. He just refused to meet with scientists, even to discuss things like nuclear warfare. He says, what could we have to share? The scientists are scientists. They know the facts. We're theologians. We have the values, the ethics. There are these 2 separate worlds. Is that really the way we are? Is that the way human beings in society have to be? Or is this a kind of convenient divide or projection of a particular kind of structure of consciousness? And I think this is it's a deep and important question. Do we lead a divided life where the scientists are able to invent any kind of disastrous technology, and it's just the regulations given by government at the hand of maybe certain kind of ethical and religious fears? Is that really the way we want to divide our nature? Or do we seek out a more integrated, holistic conception of what it means to be a human being? The scientists themselves engage the ethical questions as deeply as they engage the scientific issues. And likewise, we educate those who are in the humanities, in sciences as well. I have always, every year, taught courses outside my discipline, interdisciplinary courses with other colleagues. I've learned so much about poetry, music, art, ethics. I'm a great lover of Goethe, the German poet, who also tried to be a scientist in a very vigorous, important way. And for me, if you ask what is the root source of this split, I still think it goes back to what I was just describing. The elimination of the subjective. If you really believe that the world is only matter in motion according to the models that physics gives you, there are no experiences in that world. There are wavelengths for sound, light, but they're just wavelengths. There are these material point particles called electrons, leptons, quarks, and so on, which have no extension, are pure abstractions. That's the reality. That's the real world. Over here, the world of prayer, the world of love, the world of animosity, the world of human experience, is a fraud, an epiphenomenon on the reality that is these models and abstractions. So, what is the standing, what is the ontological standing of those subjective experiences? Not much. And yet the ethics of our lives is really grounded, really has to do with that dimension of lived experience, of the causes of suffering. Suffering is a subjective experience. We're lived in this world of subjectivity. And the split, therefore, between the objective and subjective, to me, is mirrored in the 2 cultures. The objective world given to the scientists, the subjective world given to the humanists and the theologians and the like. But what if that's a false premise? What if that's not true? What if the models you create are just that? They are models that you created. And that you put them into the world and call them real is just an act of your imagination, not actually what is the case. Right? It comes to the turtles all the way down. It comes to, again, this question of, well, we keep looking for support. And here's the dilemma. What you're looking for is something that is impossible to experience even by angels and gods. Because if it's experienced, then it's subjective. If it's subjective, it can't be the ontological, objective foundation. So that's not it. You have to go deeper. So you're on this quest to find something which cannot be experienced ever by anyone under any circumstances as a foundation for the lived world. But if it can't be experienced by anyone ever under any circumstances, what is it? You can't even imagine it. If you imagine it, it would be subjective. So isn't it a kind of bizarre that you create a whole world supported in the foundations, supported on something which is impossible to know? And that is what is real? The thing which is completely unexperienceable in principle? And that all the rest that's built on top of that is fantasy or epiphenomenon? I don't know, I don't get that. It seems to be kind of a strange thing. And then you think, science, is science really pointing in that direction? Is that really what science does? No. Whom I do not see. Whom at times I manage to visit, and whom at other times I forget. The one who remains silent when I talk, the one who forgives sweet when I hate, the one who walks where I am not, the one who will remain standing when I die. The title is I Am Not I.
That's very beautiful with this. Now we go to Kun Sarini.
Would you like to the front and use this?
So thank you very much for your talk. I find it very interesting. By training, I'm an economist and a financier, and I actually find a lot of parallel when you mentioned the point of transition towards a new paradigm, because there's a lot of talk in economics and banking as well, whether now we need a new paradigm. Because in some sense, a lot of people say the most recent crisis, the root cause was that we didn't see the other side of the equation. We only saw the rational economic man. So in some sense, maybe we had seen the subjective man. It wouldn't be in such a mess. But I think a lot of the, so I was thinking in terms of this parallel, and I think some of the debates maybe have some parallel to the scientific debate as well. For example, right now in economics, there's a growing subsection called behavioral economists, and they study, psychology of people, right? And at first people dismissed them, right, saying, "Oh, this is not economic, it's subjective." But I think a lot of people came to see the use of that because they have found some predictability in the so-called irrational behavior. So economists, when they look at these, how subjective the behaviors are, they think that it's not meaningful for us to study, because I think similar to what the point that Daniel Group was making, right? How can we draw any conclusion from that? What's the universality? But as soon as there's some behavior that's predictable, even if it's irrational, then I think more economists were willing to listen and to it. So I think, but the debate, I think, in some sense also, I think centers on the question of what's really the role of economists, right? Economists are supposed to describe the world, or economists are supposed to advise people on how the world should be run. So I think it's
institutions. And they're teaching meditation as an aid to concentration, emotional balance, engaging their subject content in new ways. So this is what I call a contemplative pedagogy, a way of teaching that is informed by contemplation and meditation. But it's in a non-religious, non-spiritual context. This bothered me in the beginning. But then, out of various conversations with friends and also with the Dalai Lama, we realized, nonetheless, this was a real benefit. You know, it's a question of, you know, if someone's hurt in the street and you run over there and you say, "Are you Catholic? Are you Buddhist? Are you spiritual?" Don't ask whether they're a criminal, whether you just help. You know? And if it helps, you do it. One of my dear friends is John Kabat-Zinn. He invented mindfulness-based stress reduction. His books have no, called the S word, spirit. And I said, John, all these practices are from Burma and from these other places. You know they have spiritual bases. Why don't you talk about it? He says, this program began at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And then I talked with the chief of surgery and medicine. I said to him, how many people do you really help and cure? He said, well, 20%. How many people get better on their own? Oh, about 30%. What happens to the other 50%? There's nothing we can do. Where would you like to have a place you could send them? I said, sure. Well, give me a little space and I'll start something. About 30 years ago he began. Now there are something over 300 such centers around the world doing mindfulness-based stress reduction, very simple breathing practices, mindfulness body practices. And hundreds of, nearly millions of people have found their way to some of these benefits. He said, I don't want the smallest barrier to exist if you're in pain, if you're suffering. And he asked, what is this? Where did this come from? Let me read some Buddhist text. Let me read something by Steiner. Let me read something by a Christian mystic. And then that's for them to decide. But if it's a value in education, if it's a value in healthcare, let's use it.
That's very interesting. So we come to
and where's I'm eating right now. This is not like, I mean, I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't have this kind of platform to talk about this stuff, but I would say there are a lot of things that we might kind of skip. You might say, you might call it like a kind of spiritual bypassing or something. We're not taking the step before taking in all this profound stuff. You know, in Tibetan Buddhism, we have this practice called Mundro, which involve prostrations, doing mantras, doing one offerings, doing Guru Yoga, which is kind of the tools to prepare ourselves before getting the profound teaching. It's kind of difficult to understand spiritually. Kind of prepare ourselves to be empty enough to take something. So when I read this book, it's a very profound book. Thank you so much for writing it. But I'm kind of concerned about how we, as Thai people, can take it. Because, science, for example, like with science, what do we understand about science in Thai society in general? I think we're kind of afraid of it somehow, and we're kind of fascinated with it somehow. But it never be part of our society. It never be part of the way we think about things. We never think rationally,